Welcome back to Starkiller Base. Today we continue our coverage of the Spirit of the Rebellion card analysis series. We're going to start off with the yellow villains today. We'll start off with Aura Singh. She's a deadly shot. She has 10 hit points. Her die sides show a 1 ranged, a 2 ranged, a 2 ranged, a 1 disrupt, a 1 resource, and a blank. She is a 14/18, and her character ability reads, before you resolve this die, you may discard a card from your hand to increase its value by 1. So effectively, her die, if you have enough cards in your hand, is a 2 ranged, a 3 ranged, a 3 ranged, a 2 disrupt, and a 2 resource. That's pretty fantastic. She can do some serious damage. There's no pay sides. There's no modified sides. It's just pure beating. So she definitely is an interesting one. I've seen her paired with Elite Balatique, so they'd be at 29 points. They have a ton of range damage sides and can bring all the yellow shenanigans to the table with things like Arm to the Teeth. She's definitely a powerful character. The art on her is rather questionable, but she's definitely one to look out for. Next we have the Guavian Enforcer. They have 9 hit points. Their die sides show a 1 ranged, a 2 ranged, a +1 ranged, a +1 resource, a +1 resource, and a blank. They're 8 cost. This is the non-unique yellow character, of course. Their character reads, action, remove this die to remove 1 shield from a character. So there are 4 sides on this die that could potentially not be very usable if you don't have the unmodified sides to take advantage of them. But worst case scenario, you can then remove the die to remove a shield from a character. So it's not too bad. It definitely allows you to have some versatility where before you sort of had to put in 1 die Balatique to get that 8 cost yellow character in the deck. Now you can put in a Guavian Enforcer. Being non-unique, you can take advantage of Guardian in a Phasma deck, and a Guardian character with 9 hit points is pretty great. Next we have IG-88, the Assassin Droid. He has 12 hit points. His dice show a 2 ranged, a 3 ranged, a 1 shield, a 2 shield for 1, a special, and a blank. He's a 15/20, so he's pretty beefy. His special reads, play a yellow weapon or equipment from your discard pile on this character, decreasing its cost by 2. So you can discard yellow weapon and equipment cards to re-roll and then roll his special and put them in for pretty cheap. He can recur thermal detonators, which is terrifying. He's got shields and he's got damage. I mean, what's not to like? I've seen people pair him with FN 2199 and just have all kinds of weapon cards in the deck. You can put them out on FN 2199, and if they're yellow, you overwrite them with something else. They go to the discard pile, and then when IG-88 later rolls a special, you can put them in play on IG-88 for 2 less cost. I mean, most of the weapons that you would have cost 2 or 3, so you're not going to be spending much to put them in play on this guy. And his die sides are pretty ridiculous. He's definitely one to watch out for. He's living up to his reputation. Next we have Unkar Plut, the Junk Dealer. He's a 10 hit points. His die sides are a 1 focus, a 1 disrupt, a 2 disrupt, a 1 resource, a +2 resource, a blank. He's a 10/13, so he's pretty cheap. And you'll notice he has no damage sides, much like Jabba. His character ability reads, action, remove any number of your dice showing a combined value of 3 or more. Then discard a random card from an opponent's hand and gain resources equal to its cost. He definitely lets you make a lot of resources, and he's very control-y. He's got those disrupt sides. You could put him in a yellow-red deck and use his die sides for Imperial Inspection. I've seen him in Unkar Plut Elite with Jabba Elite running Crime Lords, and I think Christian from Severn Gaming Network I mentioned before was able to Crime Lord Emperor Palpatine turn 1. You roll in the dice. If you get that +2 resources, you're in pretty good shape. Christian, of course, used Ace in the Hole and then just saved up the 5 resources to do it. But if you're looking at running a choke deck, Unkar Plut is pretty great for that. And if you need to make a lot of resources, he's pretty great for that too. As far as his action goes, it's kind of interesting. I mean, if you roll in a +3 range damage on a jetpack that you can't use, you can just remove the jetpack die and then trigger his ability, get some money. Obviously, it's hit or miss. It's sort of like a Kylo Ren special, except it actually discards the cards. So if you're running a mill deck, it has that effect. And then, of course, you gain resources, so that's never a bad thing. He's definitely the man to go to if you want a Crime Lord, which is kind of strange since Jabba the Hutt is the Crime Lord and Unkar Plut is just some dude on an armpit desert planet in the middle of nowhere. But, you know, hey. Next we have Slave 1. It is a 4-cost support vehicle. It's unique. The die sides show a 2 ranged, a 3 ranged, a 4 ranged for 1, a resource, a special, and a blank. The special reads, force an opponent to deal damage to their characters equal to the number of dice in their pool, distributed as they wish. So this thing is pretty beefy. It's got 3 damage sides, and then the special for a 4th. The special, of course, loses usefulness against decks that have less dice or the later in the turn that you go. But I mean, if you can roll it out as your first action and you've got a special sitting there, your opponent's not going to want to roll 5 dice into the pool because he'll be taking 5 damage to the face. Yeah, he can distribute it as he wishes, but 5 damage is 5 damage. So this one's definitely an interesting one, and if you use quad jumpers in your deck, you can ramp up to getting a slave one in for pretty cheap, I suppose. And then, of course, Unkar Plut can make the money to put out slave one pretty easily, too. Next, we have Blackmail. It is a 3-cost upgrade. The die sides show a 2 discard, a 3 discard, a 2 disrupt, a 3 disrupt, a 3 shield, and a blank. Yes, that is a lot of 3s, and why is there so many 3s on that die? Well, that's a good question. The card ability reads, after you roll this die, any opponent may give you 1 resource to remove this die. So one thing to note, of course, is that it doesn't say about re-rolling the die, so it only works when you roll the die into the pool initially. If you roll in and get the blank, that's your opponent's opportunity to get rid of the die, even though you could re-roll it and get a better side. Now, the one thing that's interesting about this card is that if I don't have any money, and that's why I didn't pay to remove your die when you rolled it in, it's effectively got 3 blanks, because the 2 disrupt and the 3 disrupt are not going to do anything. However, 3 discards and 2 discards is pretty significant, and so is 3 shields. So it's definitely an interesting card. It has that downside, but you can look at it as being part of a choke deck. So your opponent might think, well, I'm going to have to save a resource to get rid of this die every round so that I don't get disrupted big time or lose my hand or give you too many shields that I can't kill you. It's definitely going to be a fun card to play in a control deck. It costs 3, so it's pretty expensive, but Unkar Plut and Jabba can afford that sort of thing. It doesn't have any restrictions on which character to play or spotting a character, so it could be put on Dooku or somebody like that. I can't wait to see what people do with it. Next, we have Personal Shield. This one is a 2-cost upgrade equipment. Its die sides show a 1 shield, a 2 shield, a 3 shield for 1, a resource, a blank, and a blank. And the card ability reads, before attached character is dealt 2 or more range damage, you may exhaust this upgrade to give the attached character 1 shield. So it definitely doesn't do as much against melee. And if you got a Vibro Knife out, it's more or less useless. But against the right decks, this can be pretty devastating. I mean, I'll happily pay 1 to put 3 shields on my character and have the ability to get extra shields in a reactionary way. I mean, I could claim the battlefield and still use the before ability on the personal shield as long as it hasn't already been exhausted. So it's pretty versatile and it's pretty interesting. The 2 blanks are less useful, but there are certain cards in Awakenings and Spirit of the Rebellion that take advantage of blanks, like Anger and the Power of the Dark Side, so it could be comboed in with those. Next, we have Vibro Knucklers. It is a 3-cost upgrade weapon. Its die sides show a 1 melee, a 1 melee, a 2 melee, a 1 discard, a 2 discard, and a blank. The card reads, Ambush. Before resolving this die, you may spend 1 resource to increase its value by 1. So if you have the money, this thing becomes a 2 melee, a 2 melee, a 3 melee, a 2 discard, a 3 discard, and a blank, which is pretty amazing. It's got Ambush, which is great. If you're running a deck like a mill deck that is looking to kill a guy and mill a guy, this card is a godsend. Being able to do 3 melee damage or 3 discard off the same upgrade is pretty great. Personally, I really like discard, but the problem with discard and disrupt is that they have diminishing returns, right? If your opponent has already spent all their money or discarded their entire hand and claimed the battlefield and you're just re-rolling dice to maximize what you can do for your turn after you've controlled all their dice or discarded all their cards or whatnot, then discard and disrupt are effectively blanks because your opponent doesn't have anything to take. So it's definitely an interesting card, but depending on the deck that you're trying to build, you may not find it as useful. So let's move on to the non-die cards, and we'll start off with Arms Deal. It is a 0-cost event. It reads, discard any number of weapons from your hand, then gain 1 resource for each card you just discarded. And keep in mind, I've seen people play Arms Deal and discard jetpacks and things like that. Those are not weapons. You need to discard only weapons, and of course it synergizes fantastically well with IG-88 because you're putting weapons into your discard pile, getting some money, and then when you roll IG-88 special later on, you can put them into play on him for cheap. To make the best use out of this card, you probably can't run a mono yellow deck because there are not that many weapons in yellow and the neutrals for you to do this with. But it's definitely an interesting economy card. And as long as you have a way of getting the weapons out of your discard pile afterwards, like IG-88, then it could be put to pretty good use. Next we have Bait and Switch. It is a 0-cost event. It has Ambush. It reads, turn 1 of your dice showing a resource to any side. One of the first things people jumped on with this was that when you're playing Vader Raider and Vader rolls out a resource side, you can play bait and switch to turn it to the 3 melee, and because it has ambush, you can resolve it immediately. Now, it's useful in other decks as well. If you're running Jabba, you can turn his resource into a 2 discard and dump your opponent's hand. There's all kinds of options. There are certain characters like IG-88 that do not have a resource side, which would make it less useful in that deck, but it doesn't have any restrictions on being yellow or anything like that, so it's very versatile. The one issue that I was having with this card when I was playing it in my Vader Raider at the pre-release was that I was never resolving resource sides anymore, which I guess is a good thing in that sense, but it made the deck a little bit tighter on money. Next we have Friends in High Places. This is a 0-cost event. It reads, play only if you have dice showing a combined value of 7 or more. Look at the top 3 cards of your deck. You may play one of those cards for free, and discard the cards that you don't play. So this card has a very powerful effect, but of course it has a very limiting cost. You have to have dice showing a combined value of 7 or more. Thankfully you don't remove the dice, but you don't always have a dice showing a value of 7 or more. When you look at the top 3 cards of your deck, you could have a really, really expensive card in there, like, Crime Lord, for example? Or how about a Slave 1? If I've got 7 value out there and I get a Slave 1 in my top 3 cards and I put a Slave 1 in for free, or a Crime Lord in for free, I am giddy. I don't know about you guys. Yeah, you mill yourself a little bit by discarding 2 cards, but it's pretty versatile. I mean, you can play any of those cards. If you're looking at the Red Hero one, Our Only Hope, I think it was called, where you can just take the top card of your deck and either play it for free or you get 2 resources. This one allows you a lot of different options. If you had a Slave 1 and you wanted to put it in, that's great, but if you had the perfect die control card for the situation you were in, then maybe you could do that instead. I don't know. I'm definitely going to be throwing that into some decks and playing around with it, because it looks like a lot of fun. Next we have Loose Ends. It is a 2-cost event. It has ambush. It reads, remove one of your dice showing range damage to discard the top 4 cards of an opponent's deck. So it's definitely an interesting card. It costs 2, which is not cheap. It requires you to have a die showing range damage, which you don't normally see in a deck that's trying to discard cards from the top of your opponent's deck. But if you can put this thing in a mill deck and use it twice, you've gotten rid of almost a third of your opponent's cards already. It has ambush, which allows you to use it and then control your opponent's die afterwards or something like that. I have trouble figuring out what sort of deck to play it in. I mean, a Jabba Jango obviously would work, but I don't think you really want Jango in a mill deck, and things like Jabba Dooku wouldn't have very many range damage sides. So it'll be interesting to see what people do with this one. Next we have 1/4 Portion. It is a 1-cost event. It reads, remove an opponent's die, then that opponent gains 1 resource. So this is definitely another reason to add yellow into your deck if you're looking to control some people. There's no restrictions on what die you can remove. It costs 1, so that's not bad. It has the downside that your opponent gains a resource. Giving your opponent resources is never a particularly good thing, but if you are running a deck that has a lot of disrupt, then giving them a resource doesn't matter too much. And in an edge case, if you're running My Kind of Scum, it gives your opponent more resources for you to steal from them. There's also a card that is in the neutrals called Fair Trade, which allows you to swap your resources for an opponent's resources after you've resolved a die showing resources. So you could use that to pump up the number of resources your opponent has and then get more when you switch your resources with theirs. Next we have Relentless Pursuit. It is a 0-cost event. It reads, move up to 2 damage from an opponent's character to another character. This ignores shields. This one is interesting. It's sort of like a reverse Draw Attention. So if your opponent plays Draw Attention, you put a couple of damage on the character so there's 2 damage away from being dead, you can Relentless Pursuit and just finish them off. In a more normal case, if you were running a deck that has a lot of AoE damage, like IG-88 recycling thermal detonators over and over again, then putting extra damage on other characters is pretty good, because then you can just use Relentless Pursuit to focus that damage to one character and kill it. Next we have Scrap Buy. It is a 0-cost event. It reads, play only if you have 3 or more cards in your discard pile. Add a random card from your discard pile to your hand. Show the card to your opponents. So this one is a very strange one. I suppose if you played a really powerful card early on, you could use Scrap Buy to hopefully get it back in your hand and play it again. It's going to be really interesting to see people play Scrap Buy, take their discard pile, turn it over, shuffle it up, have their opponent pick a random card from it, look at it, and then put everything back where it's supposed to be. I'm not really sold on this one. I don't really even understand why you'd bother using it. when you could play cheat for one and just switch cheat for a specific card in your discard pile. But maybe someone can tell me what good it is. I don't know. Next we have Salvage Stand. It is a 0-cost support. It reads, after one of your dice rolls a resource, you may exhaust this support to force an opponent to lose a resource. So obviously this lends itself to a choke deck. If you've got Jabba in there and you roll in and you hit resources and you don't need them, you can Salvage Stand to make your opponent lose some resources, and then you can even use Jabba's ability to re-roll the resource afterwards. You could definitely play it in a Unkar Plut deck that runs Imperial Inspection, so that you're not only returning your opponent's hard paid for upgrades to their hand, but then taking away the resources so they can't play them out again. Like I said before, I'm a fan of these supports. They're cheap. They don't slow your deck down because they have an after ability on them. They're definitely for a specific kind of deck, but even if you're running a Django deck, he's got 2 resource sides. Is it bad to automatically take away resources from your opponent? Not really, but of course you'd have to put 2 copies of Salvage Stand in your deck at the expense of some other card. Next we have Armor Plating. This is a 1-cost upgrade equipment. It reads, before attached character takes damage, you may block up to 2 damage, then discard this upgrade from play. This one is really interesting and works really well with IG-88 in that it is equipment. You can also play it with Ammo Belt, I suppose, and just block damage for days. One thing to note is because it says block, this won't do anything to stop unblockable damage. So if your opponent is running a Vibro Knife, then Armor Plating is basically useless. So it's definitely an interesting card. It does take an upgrade slot and does cost 1, which is more than all the other cards we've seen in the last of these videos, but I think that the effect of this card is definitely worth the cost. So if you're running yellow villains and you want to be annoying and stay alive forever, Armor Plating is the card for you. So that is the end of our yellow villain card coverage. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you do, please like and subscribe, and we'll continue to bring you Destiny content. Thanks for watching, everybody.